Professor R.K. Dhiman, the Director of the Institute, faculty colleagues, residents, ladies and gentlemen. It is pleasure of the Department of Nephrology to present this central grand round on this topic of the COVID-19 and kidney disease today. We all understand the transition of 2009 was not that smooth from 2009 to 2020. That came with some challenges before the medical fraternity. Medical fraternity has faced with incomprehensible, unprecedented event of the COVID-19. Today, in the central grand round, we are presenting our experiences of the kidney diseases. What were the adverse effects imposed on care of the kidney disease across India, including us at SCPGI-MS. This will be our line of presentation. How we have restructured our departmental function, COVID-19 and AKI, COVID-19 and dialysis, in transplantation, and then we have few take-home messages from us. So as soon as we all remember 12 o'clock of the night of 24th March, when the lockdown was imposed by Government of India to curb the transmission of this disease. Person to person transmission was possible only with that time by imposing lockdown. But soon after imposing lockdown, next day, there was several news in this print media and electronic media that many of the patients are not able to reach to the dialysis center. They are not able to get the dialysis. And here quickly we have surveyed 19 major tertiary care institutes that include SGPGI-MS, PGI Chandigarh, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and many big corporate hospitals like Medanta Medicity, New Delhi. Where we have observed in that survey, almost 28% of the patients missed one or more sessions of the dialysis. 4% of the patients stopped reporting to the dialysis till end of the 3 weeks of the lockdown. 3% of the patients required emergency dialysis session, and 9 patients had reportedly died because they were not able to get the dialysis in time. So that kind of the adverse effect at the same time was running behind, and COVID-19 was posing some therapeutic modality was not at that point of the time, was not well defined, and that was posing many threats to the life of the patients on the dialysis. At the same time, we have also observed OPD services were declined by 92% and IPD services by 60% across all these 19 centers. Emergency, except emergency transplantation, all transplantation was stopped. And we at our institute, we have the long follow-up 3,000 patients of the renal transplantation. That was major challenge because these patients need little bit more specific investigations like the drug levels. They needs to be monitored. Many patients needs to be monitored weekly or once in 2 weeks times. So that was another challenge before us. So it was important for all of us to balance between the COVID care and non-COVID care. And to some extent, our institution, our department has tried to balance to run the COVID and non-COVID care simultaneously. We have tried to run EOPD. We have tried to admit some of the patients through the emergency. We have been able to take care of some of the transplantation patients. Quickly, we have sensed the major brunt will come to the patients on the dialysis, and these patients may not get the dialysis in the time. And we all understand the patients on maintenance dialysis will die off if they will not get the dialysis in time. They cannot survive without dialysis beyond few days. So I have taken the lead on behalf of Indian Society of Nephrology, we have made the guidelines for the dialysis for COVID-19 patients. And we have sent to the government of India, and government of India has adopted it. And it has been circulated all across the country, and the life of the many patients on dialysis has been saved. We were knowing that we are going through the unprecedented event. We are not knowing anything about this COVID-19 at that point of the time. This was totally incomprehensible disease. So we have issued one whole issue on the symposia of the COVID-19 and kidney care in Indian Journal of Nephrology in May-June issues. At that point of the time, we have sensed what would be the burden of this disease in Indian scenario. At the time, USA and UK was at the peak. We expected that 30 crore pupils would be infected with the SARS-CoV-2, and 10 crores of the pupils would have the severe COVID-19. And if you will say 5% of the patient will face AKI in severe COVID cases, then there would be 5 million cases of the AKI. And this burden, getting the renal replacement therapy in patients of the AKI, would be on the top of those who are on maintenance hemodialysis. We all understand we are in resource limited country, particularly this our Uttar Pradesh state is a resource limited state in the terms that we cannot provide dialysis to each and every individual requiring dialysis. So this has given us the time. This lockdown has given us the time to prepare ourselves to provide dialysis to the patient, and I feel to some extent we have been successful. There was some controversy that whether this COVID or this SARS-CoV directly invades kidney or not. Now we have the autopsy data that shows this SARS-CoV can directly invade kidney. Here we can see where we can see RBC aggregates in peritubular capillaries. Electron microscopic structure has shown some virus particles along with the spikes that has been demonstrated on electron microscopy. And some of the diseases, like the IgA nephropathy, kind of the diseases has been demonstrated on autopsy. Here we can see some virus particles with this red arrows. You can see there are some of the virus particles, intact virus particles within this proximal and distal tubular epithelium. This green arrow shows the spikes of the viruses, and this has been demonstrated on the podocytes as well. This has been demonstrated on the glomerular basement membrane. It was associated with some of where you can see on the last block, F block here, there was some RBCs within the capillaries, and that was showing some of the association with the thrombotic macroangiopathy can be imposed with this COVID-19. And one of the important disease, which is always important for us, is collapsing glomerulopathy, which progresses very fast. And some APOL gene, apolipoprotein 1 gene, one of the gene has been shown to be very much associated with aggravations of this disease. APOL1 genes, homozygous G1 G1 was associated with the collapsing glomerulopathy. And this disease progresses so fast the patient becomes dialysis dependent within a month or 3 months of the time. So in forms of the kidney involvement in COVID-19, we can see we came to know that can invade podocytes as well. So there would be albuminuria. In one of the series, it has been shown 4% of the patient had albuminuria at the first day of the presentation. During the hospital stay, 63% patient would develop proteinuria. Blood urea nitrogen was elevated in 27% of the patient, and it was elevated in 2/3 of the patients who died. CT scan of the kidney was showing reduced density, increased inflammation and edema, and AKI has been reported as a risk factor for in-hospital mortality. So to cope up with the situation, we have done many changes in our functioning to come to the new normals. So onwards, I will welcome Dr. Manas Patel to show you how we have changed the structure and we have coped up with the situation of the COVID-19 department.
Thank you, sir. Expecting a number of patients of infected with SARS-CoV-2 in our department, we planned ahead. And as the OPD services was physical OPD services was closed, we actively involved in our EOPD services. And up to date, we have almost consulted 3,400 patients. As per EOPD policy of our institute. We developed protocol for maintenance hemodialysis, both for prevention of SARS-CoV-2 infection and management of them if they are infected. We developed a protocol for our renal transplant patients, because most of the patients require modifications in immunosuppression. And if they are infected, what treatment best suits for them, we decided. And we also created new facilities in RCH for expecting many of the COVID patients will require hemodialysis. And till date, we have dialyzed 115 patients, and total number of dialysis sessions which we have done up to date is almost 1,000. Coming to maintenance hemodialysis patients, these patients require 2 to 3 times dialysis per week. This is essential for their life. So they are at triple disadvantage of during this pandemic. They have increased risk of getting infection because they repeatedly travel to and from a dialysis unit, which increases their chances of human encounter with fellow patients and healthcare workers. They spend 4 to 5 hours of exposure in dialysis unit. This also significantly increases their exposure to a healthcare system. There is delay in diagnosis. Studies have shown that there is delay in diagnosis because they may not have typical symptoms. They may present with fatigue but not fever. And this fatigue is very underreported by the patients because this is also a early symptoms of uremia. And also physicians or clinicians are unlikely to give importance to fatigue in a patient of maintenance hemodialysis patient. They may have higher mortality because these patients are having diabetes, obesity, or cardiovascular diseases, which is also a known factor for severe COVID disease. So central to our management decisions was protocol development was prevention of nosocomial transmission in our dialysis unit, because if more number of patients at a single time if they get infected, then they may overburden the COVID facility. And if more number of healthcare workers got infected, then there will be a depletion of specialized manpower. So what core interventions recommended in guidelines, we followed that. The core interventions were physical separation as far as possible, strict contact and droplet precautions, and early identification and isolation of infected persons. So what we modified in our main dialysis unit was we physically separated the entire dialysis unit into 8 cubicles, each cubicle having 6 dialysis stations. And we activated our 2 entries which were previously closed, so that we segregated patients into 3 halves. They will enter into the fixed entry. There is no interchange of patients. We increased the distance between dialysis stations as far as possible in our dialysis unit, and we allotted fixed dialysis station or fixed dialysis cubicle to each staff and patient, so that each staff and each patient has the same place throughout the dialysis. We minimized our staff per shift. The usual ratio was 3:1. We changed this to 4:1. This created also a manpower which is kept in backup in case of any more number of healthcare staff went into quarantine due to any exposure. We created additional dialysis facility in 2 areas, one in holding area with 2 dialysis stations. This was reserved for the patients who had urgent dialysis like fluid overload, or they have missed the dialysis, who do not have RT-PCR report or pending RT-PCR report. For patients who were COVID patients requiring dialysis, we started with 2 and gradually increased up to 11 dialysis stations in all areas of RCH, in T3 and all ICU and isolation. We have a separate dialysis nurse technician on rotation catering the needs of dialysis, and we have a senior resident on call available 24/7 for consultation and initiation, putting the lines and the starting of dialysis. We implemented strict droplet and contact precaution. We were using contact precautions previously, but we added it to droplet precautions. Social distancing was implemented and was scrutinized continuously for both patients and staff in waiting room, duty room, and corridor and dialysis unit. Patients were advised and they have been given a written instructions for hand hygiene and cough etiquettes. They were advised triple layer surgical masks or cloth masks. Usually patients take some snacks or some high protein diet, high protein food during the dialysis, which was stopped because it usually entails removal of mask. Patients attendants are not allowed inside the dialysis unit uh, uh, as far as possible, and patients were advised for own transport if possible. Staffs were provided N95 masks very early, face shield, gloves, and isolation gowns throughout the dialysis session. We started questionnaire and temperature-based screening before entering into dialysis stations for both patient and staff, and those failing screening were tested for SARS-CoV-2 RT-PCR. As our institute, our microbiology department capacity increased, we started universal testing of RT-PCR every 2 weeks for all patients. This led to identification and early isolation of asymptomatic individuals who may harbor the infection and may be the source of an outbreak in our dialysis unit. As per institute policy, we done contact tracing, quarantine, and follow-up testing. This is the early version. We adopted the first version of our dialysis triage and segregation of patient to provide optimal and possible dialysis care. We started it in as before as April. Here if the patient has obvious symptoms of COVID, we directly shifted him to Rajdhani COVID Hospital, and dialysis was done at the ERS. And if the patient has not very obvious symptoms and symptoms suggestive of any catheter infection or volume overload, then he was dialysis in the holding area. And if the patient is asymptomatic, we dialyzed him into the routine dialysis area. Coming to our data, what we have outcomes of these prevention modalities. A total of 13 patients, 13% of the patient, that is 35 out of 273 patients undergoing maintenance hemodialysis tested positive for SARS-CoV-2. That most of the patients, almost 91.5% patients, were asymptomatic during testing. However, 1/3 developed symptoms during the entire course of illness, and a very few, that is 2.6%, that is only 3 staff were positive, and none has any contact history with a positive patient. And on contact tracing, probably they have acquired the infection from community. This is the timeline of our positive and exposed patients. Each red dot denotes a positive patient, each blue dot denotes a positive staff, and a yellow dot denotes the person exposed or either patient or staff. As we can see that we've first detected our asymptomatic patient by universal screening on 15th July, and we first detected our staff on 17th July. And during the entire follow-up, only 3 staff, that is, were positive, and none of the exposed patient or staff got SARS-CoV-2 later on contact tracing. What was the outcome of our preventive measures? Where we probably protected a lot of staff from getting infected by this universal screening method of because we isolated the asymptomatic who may have spread. So early implementation of physical separation, droplet contact precautions, and universal testing that is RT-PCR once in 14 days, allowed us to protect a lot of healthcare workers and protect and usually shut down of our dialysis unit. Many centers in India, many dialysis centers in India have been shut down for some few or some days because of an outbreak. We are the only institute who is doing RT-PCR testing every 14 days for routine maintenance hemodialysis patients or asymptomatic patients. Thank you. I invite Dr. Mudit to share our experience on acute kidney.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be talking about COVID-19 and acute kidney injury. So one of the earliest studies from China had shown that the incidence of acute kidney injury in COVID-19 patients was around 5%. And in their cohort, they found the prevalence of proteinuria to be around 43% and hematuria in around 27% of the patients. But subsequent studies from United States have shown that this percentage of acute kidney injury in hospitalized patients with COVID-19 is actually higher. And this is a retrospective cohort study from New York, which showed that acute kidney incidence in their cohort was around 37%. They also found out certain independent risk factors for acute kidney injury, and older age, comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes mellitus, cardiovascular disease, vasopressor use, and need for mechanical ventilation were independent risk factors for AKI. And in their study, they pointed out that a patient who was on mechanical ventilation had an odds ratio of 10.7 of developing acute kidney injury. Another important finding in this study was that they showed increased mortality amongst these patients who developed AKI, and around 35% of their patients actually expired. If we talk about the definition of AKI, AKI is defined as a small rise of 0.3 milligram per deciliter of serum creatinine over 48 hours. And the most commonly followed classification, staging classification is the KDIGO staging. And it is based upon the decrease in the urine output or an increase in the serum creatinine. If the serum creatinine increases up to twofold of the baseline, it is stage 1. If the serum creatinine increases up to threefold of the baseline, it is stage 2. And more than threefold of the baseline is stage 3. So SARS-CoV-2 can actually can cause AKI by various mechanisms. And as we all know that severe COVID-19 infection can cause cytokine storm, and this cytokine storm itself can cause kidney injury. Then these patients have an inherent hypercoagulable state, and this hypercoagulability may cause occlusion of the glomerular capillaries leading to kidney injury. And as was pointed out by Professor Narayan, that this SARS-CoV-2 can directly invade the proximal tubular cells and the podocytes, leading to kidney injury. And there are certain unspecific mechanisms by which acute kidney injury can occur in ICU patients, like organ crosstalk, in which lung and heart dysfunction predisposes to kidney injury. And then we should never forget the nephrotoxic medications and polypharmacy given to these patients, which is always a contributor for acute kidney injury. Another upcoming concept is that there is imbalanced RAS activation in these patients, which predisposes them to acute kidney injury. So at the start of the pandemic, there was actually concerns regarding the use of ACE inhibitors and ARBs in these patients, because there was a possibility that these ACE inhibitors and ARBs would increase the concentration of ACE2, causing increased replication of SARS-CoV-2. But on the contrary, what was found was that in SARS-CoV-2 infected patients, there is increased angiotensin II levels, which cause increased inflammation and increased fibrosis. So ACE inhibitors and ARBs have no harm and may actually be beneficial in these patients. I would like to discuss an interesting case of AKI in a COVID-19 patient. This 57-year-old gentleman who had a history of diabetes mellitus for 6 years, hypertension for 5 years, well controlled on telmisartan 40 mg daily. He developed fever and dry cough, was evaluated in Patna, and his RT-PCR for SARS-CoV-2 was positive. This patient at the time of admission in Patna had a hemoglobin of 7 gram per deciliter, a serum creatinine of 1.3 milligram per deciliter. All his inflammatory markers were negative. During the hospital stay, patient developed mild ARDS requiring oxygen, and the treatment which he was given was that he received injection ceftriaxone, remdesivir, and dexamethasone during the hospital stay. Patient improved and was discharged after 15 days in a stable state with a negative RT-PCR report. This patient, 15 days after his discharge, presented to us with decreased appetite for 10 days, nausea and vomiting for 10 days, and pedal edema for 7 days. On evaluation, he was found to have advanced renal failure. His creatinine was 8 milligram per deciliter, and with these complaints, he got admitted to us. The only significant findings on examination was that he had mild pedal edema and pallor. So we worked him up and we found that his hemoglobin was 5.5 gram per deciliter. His creatinine was 8.5 milligram per deciliter. He had hyponatremia and hyperkalemia. His potassium was 5.9 milliequivalents per liter. His urine showed 1+ protein with 8 to 10 WBCs per high power field, and proteinuria was less than 1 gram. We worked him up for his anemia, and he was found to have severe iron deficiency. We also worked him up for multiple myeloma in view of unexplained renal failure and severe anemia, and the workup for multiple myeloma was negative. His ultrasound abdomen showed bilateral bulky kidneys. So with these investigations, we made the provisional diagnosis of acute kidney injury KDIGO stage 3, probably acute interstitial nephritis, and the most probable etiologies for acute interstitial nephritis was drug-induced acute interstitial nephritis or a viral-induced acute interstitial nephritis. And he had comorbidities of diabetes mellitus, hypertension, and may have had pre-existing CKD. So in view of non-recovering AKI, we went ahead with a renal biopsy, and the renal biopsy of this patient showed mild to moderate lymphoplasmacytic infiltrates in the interstitium, and there were subtle findings of acute tubular necrosis in the form of simplification of the tubular epithelium. And the biopsy was reported as acute interstitial nephritis with acute tubular necrosis. So just to summarize, this patient developed COVID-19 pneumonia in July 2020 and was admitted in Patna. He received remdesivir and dexamethasone, had normal renal functions at the time of discharge. 15 days later, he presented again with a rise in serum creatinine to 8 milligrams per deciliter and was dialysis dependent at the time of presentation. We did a renal biopsy, which was suggestive of acute interstitial nephritis. And in view of non-recovering AKI, he was started on prednisolone 60 milligram daily on 28th August. The patient gradually improved. His urine output improved. His creatinine settled to around 3 milligram per deciliter, and he was discharged in a dialysis independent state. So briefly, I would like to talk about acute interstitial nephritis. Drug-induced acute interstitial nephritis is the most common form of acute interstitial nephritis. And the first thing which we need to do is identify and withdraw the offending agents. If even after withdrawing the offending agents, there is no improvement in the renal functions, then we need to do a renal biopsy. And if there is no chronicity in the biopsy, then these patients should receive a trial of corticosteroids. So our patient was given a trial of corticosteroids and he responded, but complete recovery even with corticosteroids is seen in only 40% of the patients, and partial recovery may be seen in up to 45% of the patients. We also analyzed our data for acute kidney injury in COVID-19, and in last 4 months, out of the total 799 patients who got admitted, acute kidney injury occurred in 102 patients with an incidence rate of 12.8%, and the mean age of these patients who developed acute kidney injury was 58 years. 48% of these patients who had acute kidney injury actually died. Majority were male, and if you look at the staging of AKI, the most common stage was stage 1 in 40% of the patients, and around 30% had stage 2 and stage 3 AKI. 95% of our patients who developed AKI had comorbidities, and the most common comorbidity was diabetes mellitus, followed by hypertension. If we look at this graph, we'll see that the incidence of acute kidney injury as well as the severity of acute kidney injury increases as the severity of COVID disease increases. So severe COVID disease tends to have more AKI incidence, and they tend to have a higher stage of AKI. RRT was given to 22 of the patients who developed AKI, and death occurred in 48% of the patients who developed acute kidney injury. Most of these deaths which occurred actually occurred in patients who had severe COVID-19 infection. If we look at the unadjusted relative risk of death with AKI, it was 5.26 in our cohort with a 95% confidence interval of 3.8 to 7.2. And if we compare our data with the previous studies, we'll see that in the previous studies, the incidence rate has varied from as low as 0.5% to as high as 44%. In our study, it was around 12.8%. And this varied incidence rate is actually due to the population which they have recruited. Some studies have recruited even the asymptomatic COVID-19 infection. And if you look at the death rate, so death rate in our cohort was around 48%, and death rate has varied from as low as 14% to 53% in the previous studies. And this 48% correlated with one of the studies from Mount Sinai Hospital, New York, in which they had 45% death rate in patients with AKI. 20% of our patients received renal replacement therapy, and this proportion is actually higher than the previously reported, higher than the previous studies. So the take-home messages from this would be that SARS-CoV-2 may affect the kidneys either directly or indirectly. AKI is not uncommon in these patients, and it's an independent predictor of deaths with COVID-19. The incidence of AKI tends to increase with the severity of COVID-19 infection. I would like to call upon Dr. Ruju, and she'll be talking about COVID-19 and maintenance hemodialysis patients.
Good morning. I'll be talking on COVID-19 in maintenance hemodialysis patients. Starting with an interesting case that we encountered of COVID-19 in an ESRD patient on maintenance hemodialysis. This gentleman, he was a 70-year-old male. He was a known diabetic and hypertensive for the past 20 years. Also having chronic kidney disease, that is diabetic nephropathy, for the past 8 years. Then developed end-stage renal disease for 2 years. He was on twice weekly maintenance hemodialysis being taken elsewhere. However, he developed symptoms of fever and rhinorrhea for the past 1 week. He was found to be RT-PCR positive for SARS-CoV-2 and was subsequently admitted to Rajdhani COVID Hospital on the 9th of August 2020. On admission, the patient was hemodynamically stable. He was maintaining a saturation of 99% on room air. His laboratory parameters that on admission were, he had a fairly preserved hemoglobin of 12.3 grams per cent. Total leukocyte was elevated, that is 12,100. Platelet count of 1,31,000. His electrolytes were normal. He had an advanced renal failure. His liver transaminases were around 3 times the upper limit of normal. His albumin was 3.4 grams per deciliter and a glycated hemoglobin of 7.5%, showing a fairly good glycemic control. Coming to the hospital course. So the patient was admitted on the 9th of August. As he was maintaining a saturation of 99%, he was started on intravenous antibiotics and hydroxychloroquine as per our center protocol. However, over the next 2 days, the patient deteriorated. That is, the patient developed mild ARDS. His saturation dropped to 86% on room air. He was requiring oxygen. So he was promptly shifted to the ICU. He was started on injection dexamethasone. His IV antibiotics were stepped up. A CT of the chest was done, which, as we can see, showed bilateral ground glass infiltrates and septal thickening in both the lung fields, predominantly in the posterior region, which was suggestive of COVID pneumonia. Also, noteworthy is that his inflammatory markers, which were done by this period, had all elevated. His serum ferritin was high, that is more than 2,000 nanograms per ml. His procalcitonin was 4. Plasma fibrinogen was 346 milligrams per deciliter. His C-reactive protein was very high, that is 166 milligrams per liter, with a positive D-dimer and fibrin degradation product. Keeping all this in mind and the patient's general condition, it was decided to start injection remdesivir. But a risk and benefit was explained thoroughly to the patient's relatives, and an informed consent was taken before starting the drug. Also, hydroxychloroquine was stopped, and IV antifungals also were started. Coming to the patient's condition, initially, when the patient had deteriorated, he was requiring high flow oxygen therapy. That is, he was requiring oxygen at a 5 liters per minute oxygen flow. That was on the 15th of August. After starting of the injection remdesivir, dexamethasone and other treatment, the patient gradually improved. that is, his condition stabilized, he became afebrile, his oxygen requirement decreased, and over the course of the next 2 weeks, that is by 31st of August, he was maintaining a saturation of 99% on room air, he was afebrile, and he was discharged with stable vitals. So coming to remdesivir in COVID-19, the drug remdesivir is a nucleotide analog that inhibits viral RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. The recommended dose by FDA is 200 milligrams intravenously on the first day, followed by 100 milligrams once daily. The duration recommended is 5 days for the mild to moderate disease not requiring mechanical ventilation or ECMO, and for the patients having more severe disease requiring invasive mechanical ventilation or ECMO should have a total of 10 days duration. And also to be noted is do not administer remdesivir with hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine, as it may result in reduced antiviral activity of remdesivir. This was a double-blind controlled study which had 1,060 adult patients with COVID-19, and the patients were divided into remdesivir versus placebo. The group with remdesivir had a reduced recovery time of 11 days versus 15 days with placebo, and a 14-day mortality rate was lower, that is 7% versus 12% with the placebo group. To note here is that this beneficial effect was more noteworthy in the patients who had a mild to moderate disease, that is the patient not requiring oxygen, requiring low flow oxygen and NIV type of ventilation. However, the patients who had a more severe disease with mechanical ventilation or ECMO requirement did not have a beneficial effect with remdesivir over placebo. The drug remdesivir and its active metabolite is 74% renally eliminated. So in patients with kidney disease, the drug has a potential toxicity primarily because of the remdesivir action, which is known to cause mitochondrial injury in renal tubular epithelial cells. However, at higher doses and on prolonged exposure, much longer than what we are recommending, and also accumulation of sulfobutyl ethyl cyclodextrin carrier, which is predominantly excreted through glomerular filtration. And in kidney disease patients, the accumulation of this the cyclodextrin carrier can cause liver necrosis and renal tubular obstruction, also at doses 50 times higher than the recommended doses. So the cyclodextrin carrier is readily removed by continuous renal replacement therapy and hemodialysis, that is around 50% is removed by a 4-hour dialysis session. As all the studies had eliminated patients having a GFR less than 30 ml per minute, the conclusive data on the safety of the drug are lacking. The limited duration of treatment, that is 5 to 10 days, and a relatively low concentration of cyclodextrin carrier and its removal by renal replacement therapy is what makes it beneficial in patients with an eGFR less than 30 ml per minute for body surface area. So to summarize and to emphasize on the cautions to be taken while starting remdesivir in patients on renal replacement therapy, a written informed consent is a must. In patients with an eGFR less than 30 on dialysis, benefit should outweigh the risk. If a baseline liver transaminase is more than 5 times the upper limit of normal, the drug remdesivir is contraindicated. Also, while on therapy, it is a must to monitor the liver transaminases daily. And if at any point the liver transaminases are more than 5 times the upper limit of normal, the drug should be withheld and restarted only when the liver transaminases are again less than 5 times the upper limit of normal, and avoid co-administration of remdesivir with hydroxychloroquine. Coming to our center experience of COVID-19 in these maintenance hemodialysis patients from April to August 2020, total number of patients who developed COVID were 90, with a mean age of 43 years, mean dialysis vintage of 31 months, and the proportion of males was 3 times the proportion of females. The comorbidities like diabetes were seen in 30% and hypertension in around 95% patients. The disease severity, majority of our patients, that is 65%, were asymptomatic, and around 10 to 15 patients had each mild, moderate, and severe disease. 75% patients did not require any oxygen support, 9% required high flow oxygen, and 8 patients required mechanical ventilation. Coming to treatment, as per our disease center protocol, half the patients received HCQS and azithromycin initially, and later on the protocol was changed to azithromycin and ivermectin. 15% patients received remdesivir, 1 patient was given tocilizumab, and steroids were given. 4 patients received injection methylprednisolone, and 11 patients received dexamethasone as per the disease severity, and 10% received aspirin. Coming to the outcomes, 62% patients were cured and discharged. However, 7 patients died who were all in the severe category, and the rest 30 patients are currently admitted and being treated. The mean time to recovery was 16 days and mean hospitalization time was 18 days. A little about the experience with the use of remdesivir in maintenance hemodialysis patients in our center. We used remdesivir in 13 patients, that is 15%. of which 3 had severe disease and the rest 10 had mild to moderate disease. Of noteworthy was that all of them had radiological findings. 11 had a CT chest done with typical findings of patchy ground glass, infiltrates, consolidation in both lobes in the subpleural regions and associated reticular thickening. 2 did not get a CT done, but the chest X-ray findings were suggestive of COVID, and the outcomes were that 5 were discharged. The 2 patients of the severe 3 patients had died, and however, the other 6 who are still hospitalized are improving. Thus, to emphasize the point that early administration of remdesivir in our maintenance hemodialysis patients may improve the outcome, just as in the general population. So, to summarize my talk with these following take-home messages, most of the patients of COVID in maintenance hemodialysis patients remain asymptomatic. Timely intervention with remdesivir may be beneficial. Liver function tests should be monitored during therapy with remdesivir, and a written informed consent is a must before the use of the drug if GFR is less than 30 ml per minute. I would now like to invite Dr. Jaykumar for transplantation COVID-19.
Good morning. I'll be presenting on renal transplantation in COVID-19. On 30th April of this year, when it was still early days in the COVID pandemic in India, we had one of our transplant patients coming in with fever and headache of 3 days. He was suspected to have COVID and he was tested. He came out positive. It was feared at that time that these patients could have severe disease. The mortality rate may be high in them. He had, as per the consensus at that point in time, his AC inhibitors were stopped, and we had come down on his immunosuppression. MMF was stopped, and he had a fairly mild course, and by day 6 he became asymptomatic. But what was peculiar, and it was a learning point for us, was that the patient took almost 30 days to achieve viral clearance, and he was also one of the very first patients to receive ivermectin in our cohort. At that time, ivermectin was not commonly used. And as you can see here, he had mild graft dysfunction, which improved at discharge, and his immunosuppression was restarted back to triple immunosuppression, and on follow-up, he's doing very well. This case was reported to the Indian Journal of Transplantation. And for better preparedness, we had also reviewed the literature until that point in time. There were about anecdotes and case series of 100 patients. 26% had AKI, 11% required RRT, and 20% died. So we were prepared for facing the onslaught of transplant patients having COVID. After that, we have treated 55 patients. And I'm presenting one such interesting gentleman, a 56-year-old, who was long-standing diabetic and hypertensive. He had chronic kidney disease in 2015, and in 2016, he had undergone cadaveric renal transplantation. And he was on triple immunosuppression. This is the common regimen that we use as calcineurin inhibitor tacrolimus, a mycotic antimetabolite, and a steroid, Visalone. He had excellent graft function, and he did not have any admissions post-transplantation. And his sugars were controlled with insulin and canagliflozin, and BP was well controlled with calcium channel blocker. On 14th of August, he had fever with mild dysuria. He was treated with augmentin and levofloxacin. Since he had persistent fever and body pain, he was evaluated outside. His RT-PCR was done, which was negative, and his chest X-ray was normal. He presented to us on day 7 of fever, and since he had some respiratory symptoms, even though RT-PCR from outside was negative and his chest X-ray was normal, we had a suspicion. So we admitted him in holding area, and the RT-PCR came out to be positive. He was shifted to the isolation ward, and his at that time his respiratory parameters started worsening, as also the chest X-ray. As you can see here, 4 days prior, the X-ray was normal, and there was diffuse bilateral infiltrates. And this patient required 10 liters of oxygen and had to be admitted to the ICU with intermittent NIV. This was his index investigations. He had elevated inflammatory markers. His PF ratio was 185, which was qualifying for a moderate ARDS. He had high anion gap metabolic acidosis with normal blood sugars and urine ketones positive. This possibly could be due to the SGLT2 inhibitor, canagliflozin, he was on, and also due to poor nutrition. Now, this was the problem list in our patient. He is a renal transplant patient. The most important thing that we need to address is immunosuppression. In this patient, we stopped MMF, and tacrolimus was continued in low dose at 0.25 PD. And as per steroid COVID protocols, his steroid was increased to 40 milligram IV TDS. And for his COVID pneumonia, he received remdesivir promptly, and he was on intermittent NIV. Hydration is very important for two things in this patient. Number one, he's a transplant patient. He should not get dehydrated. And number two, he had a euglycemic DKA. With stopping of canagliflozin and IV hydration improved. IV antibiotics and good antifungal coverage were given with supportive care. This patient made good rapid recovery. As you can see here, he had bilateral extensive ground glass opacities with consolidation on day 1 with NIV requirement. By day 7, he had come to face mask with 5 liter oxygen. His radiologically also, which correlated well. And by day 13, he was on RUMAT. By prompt initiation of therapy, especially remdesivir, such changes even in immunosuppressed patients with comorbidities is possible. And he has almost near normal CT scan. He continues to be admitted with RT-PCR positive. And this patient, this is our data from April to August of 2020. We had 55 patients. I'm classifying based on their severity. And to highlight here is that the comorbidity status, that is diabetic and hypertension, was more in severe cases. 70% of our severe patients were diabetic and 85 were hypertensive. And among the asymptomatic cases and mild patients who had a mild disease, these were the therapy that was given. Their immunosuppression was reduced in 75 and 95%, and all of them received azithromycin. While for the moderate and severe group, the immunosuppression was reduced in all of them. Antimetabolites were reduced, and CNI was also reduced in about 45% of the patients. Steroid was increased in 90% of the patients, and ivermectin was given, and azithromycin, as with the mild and asymptomatic group, all had received. This was our outcomes. Asymptomatic and mild patients required roughly 70% hospitalization, and they had graft dysfunction only in 14%. Whereas if you see in the moderate and severe group, the hospitalization was 100% and they had graft dysfunction. So with increasing severity, the graft dysfunction, that is AKI in these patients, was high. And regarding viral clearance, as the severity increases, the average time for viral clearance from around about 17 days goes up to 23 days. And 6 of our patients in the severe category unfortunately expired. The mortality rate among those who had a severe disease was close to 47%. This was the data. Our mortality among our transplant patients is 11%. 40% had a graft dysfunction. Most recover after discharge, and still 50% of our patients have mild disease only. Presence of a comorbid status, like in diabetes here, augments the risk by 3.5 times, even in renal transplant patients. This is the unadjusted risk ratio. These are the gross numbers. For want of time, I'm presenting only the important things. 83% of our patients were hospitalized, and the need for RRT was 5.5%, and remdesivir was used in 42%, and our mortality in our cohort is 11%. This is how we compare with the rest of the published literature. As we can see here, the hospitalization ratio is 83% for us, which goes to say that there are some patients who can be carefully managed, even though they are transplant patients at home. And the mortality rate is 11% for us, which compares fairly in the rest of the published literature, which ranges from 6 to 28%. And we at the center, we are using a good percentage of antivirals, 42%. Now, this was about the data of our cohort who had COVID-19. Now, what about the ongoing renal transplant program? In this period, we have done 7 renal transplantation, of which 2 are the more challenging ABO incompatible transplantation. All are doing well and are on follow-up. But because of the increase in COVID pandemic, we had to temporarily stop the renal transplantation. So these patients may have atypical presentation and may worsen rapidly. Presence of comorbidity increases the risk. Stepwise immunosuppression, balanced stepwise immunosuppression is the key cornerstone in therapy in these patients. Prompt and early initiation of remdesivir seems beneficial. Viral clearance may be prolonged in this patient population. At the same time, carefully selected mild and asymptomatic cases do well with home isolation also. Renal transplant patients are prone for developing infection because of their immunosuppressed state. Mortality is uncommon in mild cases. However, severe COVID poses risk to death. Associated comorbidities may be risk factor for death. We profusely thank our friends and colleagues in Department of Microbiology, Department of Pathology, Department of Radiology, Urology, and the entire management team in Rajdhani COVID Hospital for their outstanding support and standing by our side in the care of kidney diseases with and without COVID.